Thanks. Given how many of you there are, I think it's easier for us, at least for me, to ask questions of each of you when you speak instead of, because by the time they get down there, I won't remember what you said. I have a question about, in the Central Valley full build slide, about the more efficient cost per mile and improved cost recovery from fare revenues part. So is part of your analysis about kind of the full build, you don't have to put it up there, it's not that important, putting that up. The full build being the sort of preferred situation here, is that based on the finding, based on the costs not increasing in that? What happens if, as we build, the costs go up? If it's not exactly what we think it's going to be at this moment, if, as costs often do on large projects, there are cost overruns, how does that change the analysis?
Well, when we did our analysis, we have to use the data that's presented now. I mean, the data could change for us. Obviously, it has changed in the history of the project, but we had to kind of draw a line and say, okay, this is what we know. Otherwise, we start getting into multiple scenarios.
I understand that, but let's assume that the costs go up. Let's assume that, as they have through the entire history of this project, the costs continue to rise. Doesn't that then change your bottom line of you deciding that one of the reasons that this is the preferred option because of that cost analysis? If the costs go up, that might not make, you might change your recommendation of this being the preferred alternative, correct?
I think if the costs go up, we would have to relook at it and recalculate it for sure.
And then my other question is, you have a line that says, early high-speed rail services create significant value. Can you explain why? What is the value of that?
Again, in the qualitative standpoint, we're looking at the value of proving that it can be done. So as
well, wait a minute. High-speed rail has been done all over the world. I mean, nobody is saying you can't run a train at 200 miles an hour.
In the state of California.
But what's the value of that?
I think it's changing culture. It's changing the mindset of the citizens along the corridor, but also of potential investors.
See, I actually disagree with you. I think that there's only one way to prove value, and that's ridership.
Yes.
The only value you have, it's not proving you can run a train at 200 miles an hour. We all know you can build a train that runs 200 miles an hour. It's old technology around the world. It's sort of a given in other parts of the world. So we know we can do that. The only way you prove value is if you increase ridership. Otherwise, it's all, I mean, what else, what's the other purpose? It's increasing ridership. And so I'm sorry, I understand that this hearing is not on your, this just popped up, You weren't doing your analysis for this. But what we need to see is the ridership analysis.
And that's coming.
And what's missing from all of these is that you have very different population centers and very different need for mass transit in all of these different areas. And even with the best, most convenient service in the world, you still have a capped ridership based on population, where people are working and where people are going. So I think what we need to see to have any idea of where we demonstrate viability is by looking at that increased ridership. Because in my mind, and just to cut to the chase, anything that we do anywhere along this system, assuming that our goal is to build San Diego to San Francisco, which, by the way, I want to see. I want to see that high-speed rail system in my lifetime. I want to be able to go San Diego to San Francisco. But the way we get there is by increasing ridership kind of anywhere along that section, to where you have a large population saying, we're in on train. We're all taking the train to work. We're all taking the train when we go. And California, we demand that you give us that full system. Right? Until you have the ridership that starts to demand that people want to ride the train, you're never going to get the whole thing built, because it's just theoretical. So we have to do something that's going to increase ridership kind of in real time. And so that, to me, is what demonstrates the project. Not that we can run a train at 200 miles an hour. Running a train at 200 miles an hour that no one takes does the opposite of what we want. Right? If you really want to get investment, you have to show that people are going to buy the tickets. So that's what we need to see, is what investments do we make with high-speed rail dollars that increase ridership the most along that system, anywhere in that system, that shows an investor that people are willing to buy tickets on a train. So that's my point, and that's what we need to see in your analysis, I think, you can't have a finding. You can't have a preliminary finding about where to spend this money until you know where ridership can be increased the most. So the fact that you even have a preliminary finding that has nothing on ridership shows me that you don't have a finding yet.
Well, I think the question is how do we get to high-speed rail the fastest in the state of California? What's the mission of California High-Speed Rail Authority? And our understanding is that the mission is to provide a high-speed rail service between, in our phase one, or the valley-to-valley between Bakersfield and San Francisco. That's what we're focused on. So we're looking at, within that context, if you have the money available and you can move it anywhere within that valley-to-valley line or even the phase one line, what's the best place to help you achieve your mission? And that's what we're looking at. And I would say one more thing quickly, and that is in the quantitative phase, we will get into the ridership numbers and be able to provide those to you. So
I have that.
Okay.
I think, see, you're thinking of it as an engineer, which is how do we build the fastest train in the fastest amount of time, right? That's what an engineer would say. How do we take the money we have and build a train that goes really fast for the most distance? As a politician, I say, how do I make a train that gets more people onto it so that I can show my colleagues in the legislature that they should invest more money in trains? So I think it's a different way of thinking about it. And when I hear demonstrating viability, it's demonstrating that I can get a lot of people that right now are driving to decide instead to take a train. So just wanted to say that I think there's two different ways of what viability means here, and I think we need to be clear about that. There's the one that is the easiest train to build in the fastest amount of time, and then there's the one who actually gets people to change their behavior. And I don't think you change culture by demonstrating you can run a fast train. I think you change culture by giving people who need to get somewhere a way to get there quickly, and that's more convenient than driving. Okay. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. If I may, just as a counterpoint, as we passed Prop 1A, there are certain requirements that need to be met. And so I would just ensure that we are trying to initiate high-speed rail as soon as possible, as that was the direction that voters gave to us, and it's our responsibility to taxpayers. With that, I'd like to now transition to Danny Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So many questions are raised, but I'm going to start with a written statement. So, thank you again for inviting me to the Transportation Committee High-Speed Rail Oversight Hearing. Obviously, there's numerous complex questions and issues that deserve discussion at the state legislative level. The problem that I am seeing is how this discussion is being framed, and it's very much us versus them kind of conversation, all or nothing, in or out. And I want to start by saying I'm very disappointed in the recent Fresno Bee editorial regarding high-speed rail. I'm going to quote that editorial saying, "The large bridges and other structures that are to carry the high-speed trains are under construction here, and one fear has been that if the project went unfinished, those structures would stand out as a Stonehenge-like monument to the state futility on the bullet train." I was appointed to the High-Speed Rail Board in 2015 by the Speaker, and no discussion has ever taken place in public or closed session, and I've never heard any board member, past or present, mention the idea of abandoning the Central Valley. Those framing the conversation in this way are acting irresponsibly, in my mind, and doing a disservice to the future of the high-speed rail in the Valley and in California. In fact, according to the law, the High-Speed Rail Authority is required by statute to build, quote, usable segments that will benefit local transit systems if we fail to complete our project. I hope this hearing will help reframe that conversation so real options can be discussed. Let me note, however, there has been repeated mention and concern about completing the basic civil infrastructure, track systems of the 119-mile Central Valley Corridor by the 2022 deadline as required under the ARA agreement. That has been discussed quite a bit. So, moving on. In a legislative hearing in 2018, Senator Galgiani pointed out that one of the reasons we were able to get cap and trade funding is because of agreements we made to build connected systems that serve local areas as well as across the entire state. Brian Kelly, high-speed rail CEO at this time, it says at the same legislative hearing in 2018, he said, our goal is to provide mobility and maximize connectivity for Californians, whatever it takes so that the public can start receiving benefits from the system earlier rather than later. That's the discussion I'm interested in pursuing. The high-speed rail project is in the process of providing a vastly improved rail corridor in the Central Valley. That means new, dedicated track, no longer sharing tracks designed for freight trains. That means separate, straighter, and faster and more frequent passenger trains. That is not in dispute. The question that is not being addressed is simply this. Is it better to ride a 170-mile-per-hour train from Bakersfield to Merced, but then have to get off and wait for a different train, and I might add, capable of 125 miles an hour, if your destination is San Jose or Sacramento? The analysis that you've seen before you is based on existing condition, not on upgrading an existing train non-electrified to 125 miles an hour. That is the analysis that I have not seen and have not been compared. Or is it better to have a one-seat ride throughout the Central Valley from Bakersfield to Merced, then on to San Jose or Sacramento on a 125-mile-per-hour train? That goes to the ridership question. I've asked people that question many times. Unless there is a dramatic difference in time, and I might question that difference between Bakersfield and Merced, if it's 120 mile per hour or 125 mile per hour low-emission high-speed diesel versus 170 mile an hour train, that's a different comparison. But assuming there is not a dramatic difference in time, the one-seat ride is always the answer, always. Business travelers prefer the scheduling certainty, getting to their appointments on time, because there's a schedule on one train, they don't have to get off and change, and the convenience of a one-seat ride so they can get some work done or take a nap. Families are far more concerned about the safety, comfort, and convenience of moving their children on a one-seat ride. Just herding children around the train station can be pretty complicated, even if it is a good, tight connection. And casual travelers depend on arrival certainty so they can be picked up or be on time for the events they're traveling to, music, entertainment, etc. Short of carefully coordinated interagency scheduling, it's very possible that the time saved on a high-speed train can easily be lost or made worse by transfers, even smooth transfers, never mind the inconvenience. Would a traveler from Fresno, and I'm going to make an estimate or a guesstimate, who saves 20 to 30 minutes on a high-speed train as compared to a high-speed diesel at 120 miles an hour, 125 miles an hour, would they benefit if they had to transfer in order to travel any further? Virtually every rail industry person I have ever spoken with believes that within a reasonably competitive system, a one-seat ride is the most significant way to build ridership, going to Assemblywoman Friedman's point. Can the 125-mile-per-hour one-seat ride program be built at least several years sooner than the 170-mile-per-hour high-speed rail train? The answer is yes. Will the one-seat ride program be done billions of dollars cheaper than the electric train? The 2019 project update report indicates there would be significant savings. Would it be smarter to wait to fund electrification and purchase of high-speed trains until they are actually needed for a true one-seat ride through a tunnel to the Bay Area? I believe we need to have that discussion, and I'm glad we're here having it, actually. The question becomes, which building blocks can the High-Speed Rail Authority focus on to advance the goals of the program? They are congestion relief and increased rail ridership. And by the way, there was significant discussion about the ridership statements made earlier. We didn't get into them here, but incremental versus significant versus incremental. If you have a very high ridership and you have an incremental increase in terms of overall ridership, that could be a lot more significant if you have small ridership and have a significant increase. So I want you to understand the numbers that you're talking about, Assemblyman Friedman, are very, very important, not the terminology. So increasing regional connectivity, which is extremely important. That's why I say there's nobody on the High-Speed Rail Authority who is even prepared to talk about not connecting to, hopefully, the ACE system, the Amtrak system, and somewhere in Bakersfield, maybe a system coming from the south eventually. But certainly those two systems are mission critical. Leveraging local matching funds, and I want to add a comment here. This is part of the fundamental charge We've heard a lot about the mission to build a high-speed train as soon as possible. That is not, I mean, a high-speed system is the way I view that, not a high-speed train anywhere to anywhere, but a high-speed system that works. And it may take a different building block approach. But in our charge, in the actual statutes, selecting corridors or usable segments thereof for construction, the authority shall give priority to those corridors or usable segments that are expected to require the least amount of bond funds as a percentage of total cost of construction. We're told to leverage money. That means local money, federal money, any money, private money. For establishing priorities, initiating construction on corridors or usable segments. So back to the goals. And I'm going to say attracting private sector investment is one of them, but we haven't been very successful, but we're looking at it. But significantly, addressing the governor's executive order that he came out with recently, and to quote, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate the impacts of climate change while building a sustainable, inclusive economy. That means looking at the package holistically. Where is the best value for greenhouse gas emissions, for instance? No doubt the Valley needs help there, but as Assemblyman Friedman also said, there's places in Los Angeles that are as bad, if not worse, than the Central Valley, and if we can increase ridership in those corridors at the same time, we will be doing a better job overall on greenhouse gas emissions, which I think is extremely important. If we are to maximize those goals, we should look at options. We don't have the funds to build a tunnel between the Valley and the Bay Area or Southern California. This is the fundamental question. And I believe we are unlikely to complete any tunnel in less than 15 or 20 years. In my opinion, until we have tunnels in either direction, building catenaries, maintenance facilities, and buying high-speed trains is unnecessary. Considering advances in high-speed technology, which I hope we may hear about today, it may even be premature. Until that time, we should work with our partners, addressing the issues that were brought up here today, ACE, Amtrak, Southern California Metrolink, very critical. They can help answer those questions because they know the communities a lot better than high-speed rail coming in. We should work with them now to build as much as possible on high-speed rail corridors with the money we have. $15 billion invested in the Central Valley and smaller, much smaller, targeted and locally matched investments in the bookends. In that way, it's possible we could have 3 usable segments that benefit all Californians and deliver benefits to the public earlier rather than later. There is no doubt of one thing. The Central Valley will have a vastly improved rail transit that will operate at least at 125 miles an hour, hopefully in a one-seat ride. If we can adjust our thinking, perhaps we can do it sooner and at less cost. Thank you.
If I may, I'm going to ask Director Kelly to come forward if he wants to respond to some of the questions, but I may start by saying it's a bit disingenuous to quote part of the op-ed and not to look at the rest of the words that Governor Newsom used within that editorial, as he was clear about his intentions. I would also say that those of us who voted for cap and trade didn't vote for it to work on higher speed rail and Amtrak. We voted on it to ensure that we could deliver high-speed rail for our communities. With that, I'd like to ask Director Kelly.
Is there a question, though, that I might address on that? Because I'd like to respond if you want.
I will allow time, but first I'll have Director Kelly.
Well, there's been a lot said, and I was even quoted on the end of the table, so I might respond to that. Look, connectivity is a key point of what we're trying to do here. Let's be really clear. The bond bill said build a high-speed rail system that connects the Central Valley to the Bay Area and the Los Angeles Basin. High speed is defined in the law, 200 miles per hour or more, not 170 miles in the valley, not 110 and not 125. That's in the law today. So that is what we are intending to build. Unlike any other region of the state right now, and a decision that we did not make here alone, but the federal government said get started somewhere, they said get started in the Central Valley. So this is the only region in the state of California we are 119 miles into construction. So the question is, do we finish that construction and have a line from Madera to Poplar Avenue in the middle of an orchard, or do we extend it and connect 3 of the fastest growing cities in 3 of the fastest growing counties in the state of California? Merced, Fresno, Bakersfield, with high-speed rail that is connected to an expanded ACE system that the state of California, the legislature, is funding to the tune of almost $1 billion, ACE extension to Merced, and the San Joaquin's line to Oakland and Sacramento. My view is yes. I'm certainly not a shy advocate on what I'm recommending to my board. I have 119 miles under construction now, and when we leave the valley, I want to leave the valley with value. And that does not mean a line that is not operable. And I want to be really clear. We didn't choose this off the top of our heads. We were very clear in the 2018 business plan that because we had funding constraints, we were going to ask our early train operator to look at options and give us advice, knowing that we started with 119 miles in the valley. They took a look at that and they said, the best line you can do in the valley as an interim service matter is Merced, Fresno, Bakersfield. That's why we are pursuing this. On the ridership question, there's no question that ridership growth is key. Under the early train operator analysis that we got back in our project update report, we're doubling the ridership in the valley, doubling the ridership. We're expanding the number of trains that can be done, that can operate on this line. We're doing it quicker, and we're doubling the ridership. So they are now going through a process to look at those numbers, refine them. They'll come back to my board with specific recommendations. I guess my last comment is just this. It's sad we're having the conversation the way we're having it. As Danny's disappointed that the B suggests there's, this divide between people who see the world the same way. I guess I think it's unfortunate too. The idea to divert money from what we're doing now and spend it on regional services, to me, is not consistent with the mission of high-speed rail. That's my view. Danny's got a different one. I think it's a good idea to have the conversation, to figure out what you want to be left with in the state of California. What I think would be a tragedy is if you diverted the money to other places and you were left with incremental speed improvements on largely diesel services at the end of investing that money elsewhere, and a 119-mile line between Madera and Poplar sitting in the valley. That's what I think would be tragic. And so my view is get the high-speed electrified rail going, finish your environmental work, and then work on funding the gaps into LA Basin and into the Bay Area. And with the emergence of a private train operator demonstrating interest in electrified high-speed rail today, we can probably figure out how to do that. But that's a better conversation later, certainly than the one we're having now.
So if I may, I think we're going to hopefully hear from the partners who will address some of these questions. But I think Brian pointed out the us versus them issue pretty clearly to me. And I will read from the editorial for another second. It's similarly taking money from the high-speed rail project and divert it to rail systems in their region. Now that's the editorial. The fact of the matter is we're not diverting it from a high-speed rail project to put it into other train operations. If there is any diversion, it's going to go into high-speed rail track that just like it is in the valley. These are tracks that will have to be built there on our corridors. So to imply that it's simply taking money from here to put it over there at the expense of high-speed rail, the fundamental issue is the one that was raised about, is our charge to get a high-speed train up as soon as possible, or is it to build the system the best we can until we can get a high-speed system up? That's a fundamental difference of opinion. And, we're talking about not a stranded asset. Again, that's the us versus them. We're talking about a complete system in the valley that will get you to the Bay Area or Sacramento on a one-seat ride on a train that can go 125 miles an hour, not a podunk train from a whatever field he said to another place. That is not the option. We're not having the real conversation about that option. If we choose that option, or if we choose one of those options, it does present potential for more money to be invested on our corridors to do the things we need to do anyway to get a high-speed rail system up. And I want to make one point about the speed. There's no way a high-speed train in Southern California or in the Bay Area is going to do 200 miles an hour. Period. End of discussion. 110 to 125, I believe, is the maximum possibility. The only place that is in the valley. Yes, we could build that and zoom up and down, but we would be better off connecting to an enhanced system that can run at 125 miles an hour and make a better connectivity and build ridership. But that is the difference of opinion here.
If I may,
Yeah,
again,
of course.
Prop 1A was very clear about needing a train that runs 200 miles per hour
But-
plus. So if we are unable to build this Central Valley section, we are unable to then meet the requirements of Prop 1A. And unfortunately, I don't like telling voters when they told us quite specifically what they wanted from us,
So-
that we are changing plans on them.
So do you think the voters told you to build a high-speed train no matter where, no matter why, because we want to see a high-speed train? Or do they want to build a high-speed train system and get the most benefits out of building that system from now until we complete it? I think that's the fundamental question.
In my opening statements, I referenced what Prop 1A specifically asked us to do. That's what I believe the voters want us to do, and I think that's what we need to continue to follow. With the-
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
You know, I think it's unfortunate this is a this or that conversation because I think the issue, you know, now is we have a finite budget before us here at High Speed Rail Authority, a finite budget, a mission in the law about what we're supposed to construct. But we have the capability to do some things importantly. 171 miles is not a chump change route. That's a pretty long high-speed rail route to get started. It is the beginning, not the end. But we start that, we finish the environmental work all the way from San Francisco to LA and Anaheim, and then you work on the funding gaps. Again, you have the emergence of a private electrified high-speed rail operator now entering the LA basin from the east and making the Southern California basin an interesting place to consider how we move forward together, both a state and a private partner. I'd also say there are a lot of revenue streams out there in the state of California between cap and trade and other things. And, you know, the issue is how big is the pie? Right now, I've got a very constrained pie that I'm working on. But there are other cap and trade programs, and the idea of utilizing some of these things so that we can do more concurrent investments in this area so that we can both construct what we want to construct in the valley and move forward on expanding regional services in the LA basin and in the Bay Area. I think there's a potential there. I think the question is how can you utilize cap and trade dollars beyond what's dedicated to us to do that. I think what we react to is the idea we should take it from there and spend it there. And that's what I think we're pushing back on. I think the idea, though, that we can look at a broad revenue source in California and figure out how can we best utilize this to achieve collective objectives. I heard Assemblywoman Friedman say earlier, you know, she wants to ride the high-speed rail train. I want her to ride the high-speed rail train. She also wants improvements on the more traditional services in her region. I want those improvements too. And I am convinced that when the spine system that does go fast connects in those regional areas, it will lift ridership on all of them because that's been the experience around the globe. When you take a high-speed train from one city to another and you get into that city with a connected train station, people tend to get off that and use local transit. And that's what we'd like to see repeated here in California. So it's a healthy, robust conversation. I don't feel like we're on the opposite sides of what it looks like at the end. It's kind of how we get there. And I think maybe we ought to look at how that pie can be expanded and utilized as opposed to tug of war between revenues between different entities.
Assemblymember Friedman, any questions before we move on to Helen Kirstein?
Well, first, I'm really enjoying the conversation. Just to remind everyone, when we talk about Prop 1A, also, it was very specific, put in front of the voters as a connection between San Francisco and Los Angeles. It was not a connection between parts of the Central Valley, as much as that's important to the system, and we have to keep that in mind. And the restriction about the high-speed part, as far as I know, was on the bond section, not on the cap and trade section, which is a much larger portion of the funding. So I think when you talk about, we said we're going to spend the money on one thing and now we're taking it to something else. No, nobody is suggesting using it for something else. Everybody is saying, how do we do what the voters asked us to do, which is to build high-speed service, effective train service between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and do it in the way that brings us closer to that vision of being able to get on a train at Union Station or at Burbank. It'd be great to go to San Diego, but at least for Prop 1A's purpose, and get up north. And the question is, do we do that best by sticking the course and doing that true high-speed service between the areas that we have it under construction, or do we spread the money further up and down that line, which was the goal, that whole line, and get that line working as efficiently as possible, and then complete the project? And I don't think that puts us on other sides. I don't think that's about moving money from one region to another and changing that experience. I want the people in the Central Valley to get on the train. And to do that, they have to have the best and most seamless train experience. And I am concerned about what Mr. Curtin points out about having to change trains. As someone who's had to change on a lot of trains, when you do it with a stroller and a bag and an infant, that makes you think twice about doing it. And so I think we all need to think about what those speeds are and what will really increase ridership. And to just say, if we do this, we double the ridership, well, what are we comparing that to? We're obviously not doing nothing. You're under construction. We want that construction to be completed. Nobody is talking about walking away from that. Having a train that's separate, having passenger train that's separate from rail train is very important, and making these improvements is important, but how do we have an experience that gets the most people onto the train is what I'm going to continue to ask about, and what is the baseline you're comparing it to. And no one is, I've heard people say, do we abandon this project? I don't think anyone's talking about walking away and abandoning any of the investments that have been made or stopping any of those investments. So,
If I may, though,
Yeah.
I mean, here we stand at where the high-speed rail station will be, and we need to acknowledge that our rail line is roughly a mile plus from here. There will be throwaway costs if what you are suggesting needs to be followed. So I think there is quite a bit of discussion that needs to be had before you guys can seamlessly say that there's a transition to diesel, or that that's even a conversation that needs to be had in this moment. I think we've had this conversation before, and it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I think we need to make sure that we can deliver on a project as soon as possible, and would like that to be the focus of where we get to.
well, let me just ask Mr. Curtin, I mean, what would we be sort of throwing? I mean, I think that we're hearing different things about what people are envisioning, what the suggestion is.
I'm not sure. I'm sorry. First of all, I really would like to hear from some of the others on this, but I'm not sure what reference to throwing away cost you may have compared to the sort of the engineering, the track and systems issues. This has been a very, very costly project. As, again, Assemblywoman Friedman said, it's been rare that we have not used all of the contingencies on our cost. There are constant problems. The real issue is what's the best investment use of our money, the amount we have, what will be the best return for the state of California. Of course, there will be throwaway costs. I think there will be throwaway costs either way you go. You know, you can electrify tracks that are not electrified. They're doing it in the peninsula. It's whether you do it now and you put that out front costs 10 or 15 years before you need an electric train to prove that you can do it. That just doesn't make sense. To me, that will not attract investors. That will make investors think they still haven't gotten it together about how to build a train in terms of getting people on that train. That's the way I view it. Now, other people, including the governor, may have a different point of view. I certainly didn't come here to have a conversation with the governor's comments. I read this in the Fresno Bee. It was a little disturbing. I think they mischaracterized the real issues here. So again, we could go back and forth, and CEO Kelly and I could do this for a while, and I'm assuming we could all do that, but I'd really like to hear from some others.
I'm happy to move forward.
Yeah.
Helen Kirstein.